Femi, are you out of your mind? How could you even think of bringing this thing into my home? She gestured to Ayomide, who was sitting down beside her fiance, with tears streaming down her eyes. Femi, the man she had been dating for the past 1 year and a half, proposed to her last week, and she couldn't be happier. He loved her, and she loved him. She had always been dark in complexion and had had trouble finding a good man who would love her for who she was. The men she dated at some point had brought up skin whitening. She didn't understand what their obsession was. These very same men weren't light-skinned, so she simply couldn't understand. Some of them would make little rude comments about her skin color. Others just came right out and told her that she would look prettier if she was light-skinned. But she was a woman who already knew how beautiful she was. She knew she didn't have to whiten her skin. Her last boyfriend had given her an ultimatum to whiten her skin or he was going to break up with her. She chose to break up with him. Yes, it hurt, especially when all of her friends were already married or were heading in that direction, and she was single and searching. So when she met Femi, she couldn't believe her luck that such a man who didn't ask her to bleach her skin, who praised her beauty every second, and who treated her like a queen. This was a man she would go to heaven and back for. So she was really taken aback when they went to meet his mother to tell her of their good news of getting engaged. She was enraged at the prospect of her son getting married to what she described as this. Mrs Oyebola's husband was a wealthy man, and he had 3 children before he passed away. He took great care of his children and sent them to the best schools. He passed away when Femi was still in university. Femi was the apple of her eyes, her last child, but he clearly didn't inherit her sophistication, she called it. How could he even look at that black cat and declare his love for her? Not to talk of marrying her. Her anger knew no bounds. She had met Ayomide a few months ago, but she didn't think she was a threat because her son was sowing his oats, and she would soon be out of his life. After all, dirt should be left outside. Femi had had beautiful, light-skinned girlfriends before this Igbiri, so she couldn't understand why none of them had stuck around. Certainly, she thought, this girl must have a hold on her son. She turned to her son in a sharp manner and said, "Don't tell me she's pregnant. And even if she is, it is not a new thing for a woman to be a single mother or abort the baby. Because any girl who gets pregnant in this day and age is obviously trying to tie you down." Femi knew his mother believed that things and even people should glitter like gold, and he knew she had a dislike for Ayo, but he didn't know that the dislike was simply the surface of things. No other woman had come close to Ayo in any aspect. The woman was smart, kind, sassy, and she made him smile, and he was glad no one had valued her enough because he would have never known the loss. So he wasn't going to allow anyone to take away or hurt the woman who was his very life. Femi knelt before Ayo and held her face in his hand, cleaned off her tears and smiled at her. "You are beautiful, never doubt that. I will not let anyone hurt or make you cry, no matter who that person may be. You are my present, future, and forever." Femi held Ayo's hand and led her out of his mother's house. "Femi, Femi, Femi, come back here. I am your mother. Do not walk out on me because of that thing. Come back here," his mother screamed at him. Mrs Oyebola couldn't believe her eyes and ears. Her precious son had been taken by a witch right before her eyes. Mrs Oyebola called her daughter Feromi the moment Femi stormed out of the house. Feromi managed to calm her mother once she finished her tale. She also didn't understand her brother's obsession with Ayomide. She wasn't the most beautiful or educated amongst the women he dated. She had seen it coming. Only a blind man couldn't see her brother's love for this woman. She had once mentioned this to her mother, but her mother had crushed the idea the moment she heard it, saying, "A lion's cub will resemble a lion." Well, turns out she was dead wrong. Mom, calm down. At this rate, you will lose Femi. You need to approach this from another direction. You outrightly rejecting Ayomide will simply make him hold on to her tighter. You need to put on a drama with her, smile at her, pretend you have accepted her, then constantly undermine her and her looks. I'm sure she already has low self-esteem about how she looks and the color of her skin. But that means I would have to agree to them getting married. I can't do that. My friends and the world will mock me for marrying my precious son to a black cat, Mrs. Oyebola exclaimed. Mom, you will have to endure for your precious son's sake. Also, this won't be the first marriage to fail, will it? There is nothing new under the sun. Once they are divorced, you can then pick a wife for him. Perhaps you're right. My humiliation would only be short-lived if I put on a facade. Thank you, my daughter. Give your husband my love. Ayomide had tried to reason with Femi for days now. She understood that his mother was rude. She honestly wasn't expecting his mother to like her. Whoever made the rule that the mother-in-law had to love the daughter-in-law was on drugs. She believed that just like any relationship, they had to get to know each other instead of being forced to pretend like they loved each other at first sight. She was at work one Friday afternoon when she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. When she picked it up, she was shocked to realize it was from her soon-to-be mother-in-law. She had asked Ayo to have dinner with her that day. Ayo accepted if she wanted things to get better between them. They should start with food and a conversation. This way, they would get to know each other well. Ayo was nervous as she sat in the restaurant, seeing her soon-to-be mother-in-law again after her last outburst, but this was needed. Mrs. Oyebola took her time to get ready and an even longer time to get to the restaurant. She made Ayo wait for 40 minutes after the set meeting time. The moment she walked into the restaurant, she was dumbfounded. She saw Ayo already eating. She thought she would be waiting for her to arrive before she ordered her food. But that was not the case. When Ayo spotted her soon-to-be mother-in-law, she got up and greeted her. "Good evening, ma. Please take a seat." Mrs. Oyebola was already annoyed with the audacity of Ayo, but she was a woman on a mission to win back her son and make nice with his black cat. So, she put on her best smiles, leaned closer to Ayo and said, "I was out of line the last time we met. I hope you wouldn't hold it against me, my dear daughter." The word daughter came forced, but at least she said it. Ayo wouldn't exactly call what her soon-to-be mother-in-law said to her an apology, but she took it anyways because she wanted peace. And so she smiled and said, "Apology accepted." The rest of the evening went by making small talks. Ayo was more than exhausted when she got back to the home she and Femi shared. She was happy. When Femi came home, she told him about his mother's call and her apology. To say that Femi was surprised was an understatement. He had never known his mother to apologize. She always thought she was right. He was glad that they had made up. He wouldn't let his mother get away with insulting Ayo. When they started preparing for their wedding, things took a different turn than they expected. Ayo and Femi didn't want a big wedding, but Mrs. Oyebola wouldn't hear of it. Yes, she didn't want anyone saying the woman her son was marrying, but it didn't matter because that marriage, as far as she was concerned, was going to be short-lived. Ayo was at the wedding shop with her best friend, Femi. They were trying out wedding dresses when her mother-in-law walked in. Ayo was surprised to see her there. She hadn't invited her on purpose because she was overbearing and she wanted space from her. But Mrs. Oyebola didn't understand the concept of boundaries. She was clearly annoyed that she wasn't involved in helping her choose a wedding dress. Ayo had given up and had figured out that she and her soon-to-be mother-in-law had different taste after the traditional marriage, when her mother-in-law had chosen her own color scheme with her friends. She said no to every wedding dress Ayo put on. Fumi was irritated with this woman who thought she knew best, and it was her duty as the maid of honor to get rid of any pest in the bride's way, even if that was the groom's mother. So when Mrs. Oyebola was assessing and criticizing another wedding dress Ayo put on like she did with the rest, she grabbed a bottle of wine that was offered to them by the shop owner and pretended to trip and poured the entire thing on Mrs. Oyebola's head. Mrs. Oyebola screamed so loud the entire city heard her. She couldn't believe what just happened. She rushed to get back home after screaming insults at Fumi at her clumsiness and how stupid she was. Fumi and Ayo laughed as hard as they could. Whoever said, "Whoever laughed last laughed best," had never met Mrs. Oyebola. The following week, she crossed her imaginary boundaries. A month to the wedding, she sent Ayo a package. The package contained skin whitening soaps, serums, and body moisturizer. Ayo stared at the package with her words in her throat. She picked her phone to call Mrs. Oyebola. "I hope you have gotten the package I sent to you," she said the moment she picked up the phone. "And also, I booked you 5 appointments with a beauty clinic. They will help make your skin clean. It is your wedding day after all. You should look presentable, so I wouldn't be embarrassed in front of my friends and families. I didn't like the photos of you and my son that was taken on the traditional wedding day. It was too dark for me to see anything." Ayo was seething with anger on the phone, but she said nothing. She managed to breathe out the words, "Thank you, Ma." Ayo waited for Femi to come back from his outing. When he did, she told him what his mother did, and as predicted, he lost his head. But she held on to his arm and explained to him that she didn't tell him so he could fight with his mother. She just wanted him to know. Despite Ayo asking Femi not to be angry with his mother, Femi went to visit his mother the next day. His eyes were calm and his voice was steady when he spoke. "Mom, I respect and love you as the woman who gave birth to me and raised me. You have a place in my heart that can never be replaced. I am your son, not your puppet. Because you gave birth to me doesn't mean I would dance to your tunes. Because I respect you doesn't mean you should disrespect me. Because you have a special place in my heart doesn't mean I don't have others who have a special place in my heart. But if you want to rule over me and write my story for me, our bond will break and nobody will be able to put it back." Femi stood up and walked out of his mother's house without eating or drinking anything. Mrs. Oyebola looked at the figure of her son as he left her home. Something was different. He wasn't angry, but it seemed as if he was threatening her, and she didn't understand why. So she picked up her phone and called her daughter. When she told her daughter what Femi had said to her, Feromi also came to the conclusion that Femi did threaten their mother. So she asked her mother if anything had happened in the past week for him to say what he did. Mrs. Oyebola then told her how she sent Ayo the skin whitening package. "Oh, Mom, what did you do?" Feromi said. "I asked you to be discreet. You shouldn't have sent her a package, especially in the home they both live in. Femi obviously saw it and saw your intentions. Mrs. Oyebola couldn't believe the big mistake she made. She was in a rush to make Ayo feel sad, but ended up shooting herself in the foot. That very evening, Mrs. Oyebola was in the home of Femi and Ayo. She needed to make nice and make her son believe she didn't have any malicious intent. Femi, Ayo, she said in a low apologetic tone. I wasn't trying to insult Ayomide. It's just I did the same thing for your sister Feromi when she wanted to get married. I believe a bride should look her best and have a shine that nobody can dim. That was why I booked her at the beauty clinic. If I have offended you, Ayomide, it wasn't my intention. Mrs. Oyebola was bawling like a child. That Femi and Ayo felt bad. They consoled her as best as they could. But it occurred to Ayo that her soon-to-be mother-in-law still never uttered the words, I am sorry. But she put that thought to the back of her mind. After all was well that ended well. Their wedding was beautiful. People came from far and wide. Ayo was a picture of a beautiful angel, and Femi was a happy man. The ceremony went off without a hitch, which was a relief, because Femi didn't want his mother to create any sort of problem. If he was being honest, he half expected her to wear white with the way she was acting, as if she was the one getting married. Finally, Ayo and Femi went on their honeymoon. 2 months after their honeymoon, Femi traveled overseas, and that was when Mrs. Oyebola came into their home with the excuse of keeping her company. At first, Ayo thought she would only be there for a few days, but a few days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months. 2 months to be exact. When Femi came back from his business trip, he was surprised to see that his mother was still in their home. But his surprise was short-lived when Mrs. Oyebola told them that she was going to leave the very next day. And so, she began to pack her bags. On the day she was to leave, Ayo came down the stairs to find her mother-in-law on the floor, rolling around in pain and holding onto her left leg. She had broken her left foot, the doctor said, so she would have to stay off her foot for a whole of 5 months. Ayo felt that as her children, they should do their very best to take care of her. But she wanted to return to her home because she said she didn't want to disturb the newly wedded couple. But Femi and Ayo insisted she stay with them. When Mrs. Oyebola was alone, she called her daughter and said, It worked. I am going to do my best to ruin this marriage and keep my son from having a child with a black cat. Watch out for part 2 next week. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think of this story? What do you think of Femi? What do you think of Ayo? And especially, what do you think of Mrs. Oyebola? And what do you think she's up to? What do you think she's about to do? Let me know. Leave your comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video.